On behalf of the captain and the crew, we'd like to welcome you aboard Flight 080, an interview with the 6 Million Mile Flyer. Cabin crew, arm doors, and cross-check.
Thank you for listening to us today. If this is the first time listening to this podcast, welcome aboard. If you're a returning listener, we're glad you're back. Seat 1A provides tips and tricks from more than 5 million miles worth of flying to help you take off from the crowd.
In today's experience, recorded on the 6th of April, 2024, we are going to interview a longtime friend of the show and of ourselves personally, who has more than 6 million miles worth of flying. And now we'd like to welcome Senior Leadership Advisor and Innovation Enabler, Marco Villa. So just a quick intro before we bring him onto the show. Marco has flown over 2,500 flights, and it will not stop for a long time. Has flown over 6 million miles around the world, probably in every direction one can imagine, and has worked in a number of fields and is based out of Dubai. He's worked with PwC, works as a guest lecturer at several universities around the world, and is working in a number of different fields of business with not-for-profit initiatives in a number of geographies, in a number of different sectors. So without further ado, I'd like to bring into our experience for today, Marco Villa. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
So I will start. Yeah. Thank you for the introduction. That was very nice. Indeed, I seem to have the privilege of having a job that takes me to multiple planes in multiple places, and that has been going on now for longer than I would like to admit, but it's been about 3 decades now of international and intercontinental flying. But the passion started when I was a kid, as it happens for many of the people that love flights, planes, and aviation. So now my main occupation is a consultant, business consultant, specifically a corporate trainer. So most of my travel is to deliver different training programs and leadership development programs for different clients in different geographies. And I'm consider that to be a privilege, and I'm still enjoying it a lot.
I love it. I love it. And, you mentioned 30 years and the love of air travel. And, that's exactly what Geoff and I love, is that sort of old school era of aviation and where it's come from and its roots. And I think we're all kind of in that same age category to appreciate that. In our years of knowing you and where we've all been, it's going to be fascinating to learn more about it. I think you and Geoff have traveled recently together somewhere in the last couple of years.
Yeah, in 2022, we were traveling in Mozambique and had crazy experiences with the Mozambican police and racing to the airport and getting to places. So I can say that, flying with Marco is interesting. And it was always, I could tell that it was like how much he enjoyed flying, because every single plane we were on, he was pulling out the history of the tail and which airlines had leased or owned this particular flight before we even were flying it. So that was really lots of fun. So.
And I think it was one of the probably the only flight I've ever took in a middle seat in the past 20 years. That was the internal flight from Nampula to Maputo, because we checked in basically 5 minutes before the flight was started boarding. So we had to get whatever was available to us at that time and be very grateful that we made it on the plane.
Fantastic. So before we dive into a little bit of story, so, with just from what we've learned about you already, I'm sure you have a bit of status with some of these airlines, but is there an alliance that you kind of lean towards, and what status do you have, and how does that all flow for you typically on a daily basis?
Well, as you mentioned at the beginning, I have an experience with PwC in my past, and I was based in London at the time. It's a long time ago now, 20 plus years. But being based in London, I started flying with British Airways a lot, of course, and managed to keep the status with One World Emerald for most of the last, so the past 20, 23, 24 years. I think there was a pause of 3 or 4 at some point. And I'm actually less than a year away from the lifetime gold status on British Airways, which I consider to be, my lifetime achievement. I mean, some people have kids, some people have bright kids. That's what I got.
Oh, we love it. This is what we want to hear. Fantastic.
But my first love was Lufthansa, to be honest. When I was a member of ISAC in my younger age, and they were our sponsors in the mid '90s, sponsoring this association of students flying around the world on standby tickets. So that's still my first love.
100% agree with you. And for our listeners, all three of us were part of this international student organization that Marco just mentioned. And yeah, you're right. Lufthansa did have a sponsorship
IP75.
It was essentially the equivalent to a staff ticket and doing staff standby madness around the world and sitting around airports waiting for these 747s to show up and hoping there'd be seats somewhere. It was all fascinating and magical. I mean, the amount of time we've all logged at Frankfurt, I'm sure, is something, of an achievement in itself. So now business travel, I'm sure, there's the standard routes that you fly, like your London JFKs and this sort of thing. And I'm sure Dubai to all points is fairly common for you. But can you tell us about your top, perhaps 2 or 3 weird destinations that you've gone on for business and a trip?
Definitely the first one that came to mind where we were mentioning or thinking about this possible question is at the station where I flew there again. It's been a few years now, and unfortunately things didn't get any better down there since then, but it's Eritrea. I had to go to Eritrea 15 years ago or something to survey a project on behalf of a client. And Eritrea it's a very closed country by really much standards that we can use, even more now than it was at the time, and particularly fascinating for an Italian as I am, because it was one of the few countries in the world that actually had an Italian domination for a couple of decades back last century. So it was very strange to be in an African country that feature a typical Italian architecture from the 20s and the 30s. And it was very difficult to access. Probably one of the most interesting aspect of that trip was I got to fly with Eritrean Airlines on the way back from Asmara to Milan. I flew down with Lufthansa, I remember that. But I flew back with Eritrean Airlines on one of the strangest routings because the plane was, I still remember that, even it was a few years ago. I remember it was a 7X, a former Egyptair. I could tell that from the coffee makers, a former Egyptair 767, 3-class configuration, flying Asmara, Jeddah, Amsterdam, Milan, Malpensa. But because after Milan, Malpensa, the flight would go back to Asmara straight, the stop in Amsterdam, so the layover in Amsterdam was about 5 hours. So you were on the same flight, but that plane stayed in Amsterdam for 5 hours. I remember I went to sleep in a lounge, and I also remember that was pretty much the only time in my life I took off with the seat completely flat, because since it was Eritrean Airlines, and the first class ticket was actually pretty affordable, considering that I was flying for business reason. I did take first class, and I was the only passenger in that. And we stopped over in Jeddah for an hour in the middle of the night, and when we took off, buddy actually cared about telling me to pull up my seat. So I woke up, I was in the air. That was the one and only time something like that
Wow.
happened. I guess it's a lot. It's common if you fly with your own plane, but on a commercial airline,
Yeah, no kidding.
that is very
Yeah.
that is very
So
common.
seatbelt on and everything, and take off fully flat.
I don't remember anything. I was sleeping. It was like 3 a.m. and at some point I realized that we were flying. I pulled down my seat during the time on the ground. So but because it was 3:30 a.m. I fell asleep, of course.
The number of people that would
And so that
dream
was
about that
certainly,
is amazing.
yeah, it was an interesting. I can't remember much about the food, but it wasn't remarkable that much I remember. So it was certainly a very peculiar country, a very strange air. And unfortunately, I think they went bankrupt, and now Eritrea doesn't have its own airline anymore. So unfortunately, that the country is in a pretty sad state now. While in another exotic destination, I mean, exotic at the time, still exotic now, but this one went in the opposite direction and developed much more, is Tajikistan. And that's another country where I went once for a project. But now you can quite easily fly to Tajikistan from with Turkish via Istanbul. They have their own airline that serves a couple of European destinations. You can go through India, so there are some easier ways. I think Dubai as well is covered. There are some easier ways to get to Dushanbe, but that was not the case a few years ago. So the only reasonable, feasible way to get to that capital was to fly to Uzbekistan. So go to Tashkent first, and then somebody would pick you up, take you across the border. After 4 hours or 5 hours drive, you would get to the second city of Tajikistan. It's called Kujand, where you could actually take a Yak 42 internal flight with Tajikistan Airlines that would take you finally to Dushanbe.
Wow.
Which I've done a few times, like 2 or 3 times.
Oh, sorry. Just not just once, but a couple times.
No, a couple of times. And it was an interesting experience especially for like so-called Westerners, as I am, because you could really experience the Soviet procedures of boarding and flying an aircraft, starting with the one that was probably the most peculiar was that we are used to board a plane and being welcomed by a flight attendant while the pilots are doing their things just before pushing back and takeoff. I mean, paperwork, whatever it is that they do in there. That was not the case during the Soviet times. I've learned, and it was still the case, still the same with Tajikistan Airlines. The passengers would go on board, sit, be ready with their seatbelt fastened, and then the pilots would come on the plane. So when the plane is ready for them, then the pilots would show up, sit in the cockpit, and then fly the plane wherever it is that they need to fly the plane. But they are the last that they do the runway show, and then they go they stroll through the plane because the Yak 42 actually boards from the back. Yeah, and then so they walk through, and then they sit, and then they start the plane and they fly.
Wow.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's a bit unnerving. I have this vision of you see it in the movies, they kind of portray a scene similar to this. And as you said, a Westerner is there all petrified and unsure. And then there's like this other, typically in a movie, it's like a hippie character that's just doing it as if their eyes are closed. Like, yeah, this is normal. I can see you following that role after the second, third time. Like, no big deal. This is how it is.
Yes. So, but one thing that I wasn't particularly scared by that. The most unnerving part of one of those 3 or 4 flights was like a painting blocking the emergency exit. They just placed a painting that somebody was carrying with them and just placed it in front of the emergency exit, and that's where the paint flew all the way. So that was something that you wouldn't probably see on Air Canada.
Yeah, that's true. But for all these like funny airlines that we talk, I mean, once you're up and in the air at cruise, pretty unremarkable. I mean, apart from the painting, I suppose. Or was there anything obscure when you were actually in flight?
Yeah, I mean, Not really. No, they were pretty short flights. Especially, well, Almaty to Dushanbe was a bit longer. That was the only one that I think included a meal that I remember. I don't remember what was there, but I remember there was a boiled egg for some reason that made an impression. The fact there was a boiled egg in the middle of a plate, and that was probably the main course at the time. So that's another. That was certainly a different experience.
I love that that's what you remember is the boiled egg. It's
Boiled egg,
fantastic.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, that's great. I mean, well, not a lot of people have the chance to travel to those places. And as you said, things have changed with modern airlines and now being able to fly to Tajikistan and all these places. But I can imagine it would have been quite a novelty and experience in those days.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, then passing the borders at that time, I was accompanied by some personnel from the United Nations, and they would use that back and forth also as a way to move the resources that they needed, because at the time the banking system in post-Soviet Tajikistan wasn't really up yet. So the only way to move cash was to physically move cash. So they would transport me and a couple of bags of cash. They would need to pay salaries, and for the normal operations. Thankfully, it was not a war zone or anything like that, so it was relatively safe to go around. But it was certainly an very old-styled way to move resources from one country to another one.
This reminds me of that movie with Sylvester Stallone, Cliffhanger, where the plane is carrying bags of cash and then it crashes and there's cash flying around the mountains and they have to go search for it. With that 767 that you mentioned, that was I think it was former Egypt Air, because I had been on a plane very similar to that.
Former Egypt Air.
Yeah. Was there any livery? Was there any paint on the outside, or was it just unmarked?
No. It was fully painted in the Eritrean Airlines livery. That I'm sure, but if we Google that, we would find it, which was actually quite an attractive livery, and nothing mind blowing, but pretty nice. But definitely the interior hadn't been refurbished in a while. So that part I remember. The outside, the plane actually looked quite stunning.
Nice. Okay, well, that's reassuring. Now, you travel a lot, you see a lot, and I'm sure you have your ways and your style when you're in the air. But please tell us, I'm sure you have some pet peeves of, the traveling public and what you see on board. What what are your thoughts on the other people and what annoys you when you fly?
Or airports, or things that happen in the actual journey?
Yeah, in the entire journey experience.
Yeah, well, like pretty much anyone that flies moderately or a lot, we do, I guess, develop as you do a few pet peeves that they can be summarized in the concept of lights and sounds. So anything that disturbs the quietness of a peaceful flight or of a peaceful wait for the flight falls under the category of a pet peeve. But I guess that the one that certainly queues are not great, whether they come in the form of check-in queues, and I'm lucky enough not to do a lot of those. A, because I fly with hand luggage most of the time. B, because I have status on the main on the 2 out of 3 main alliances. Actually, no, 3 out of 3 if we consider also SkyTeam, because I do, for some reason, ITA Airlines did a status match on some other cards, so I actually have status with them as well. Although they are a fake member of SkyTeam, because they don't enjoy full membership for some reason. Plus Emirates, so I don't get to do a lot of queues unless I fly with a local carrier, as I did a couple of weeks ago, flying from Madrid to Milan with Ryanair. That was the first time with Ryanair in a long time, and it took me 45 minutes to just to drop my bag. There's nothing wrong with that for most people, but I wasn't used to it, so it was like an exotic start of the day, and then I did not enjoy it. So it comes in the form of a queue, falls under the category of the pet peeve. But the one thing that I think annoys me the most on longer flights, especially, is a meal served at very funny and times that don't make any sense to me or to anyone around me, apparently. And especially if flying economy, even if you fly business, but when you fly economy, it's more difficult to ignore what goes around you, what goes on around you compared to business classes. So when you're in the middle of a sleep, in the middle of the night, and then the airline decides that that's a good time to sell a snack, that's nothing bad with that, or nothing wrong with that, unless you decide to do it the way they do it, which is you turn on all the lights and then you wake everybody up, and then you give half a sandwich and water, and then nothing until nothing until landing. So that doesn't make any sense at all. It happened to me a couple of times that the Emirates tend to have this. I think that it comes from they come from a good place. I mean, they want to keep the passengers fed and give a sense of care, I guess, and differentiate themselves from other airlines that maybe leave you alone. But when it's the middle of the night, last thing you want is for your sleep to be disrupted. And there's another pet peeves that I have, which is hotels that don't have chairs. That's the one thing. And by chair, I mean an armchair or a place where you can sit and watch your TV or your Netflix at night. Because when you travel for business, yes, I mean, on some nights you might have some functions that you need to attend, but on a few occasions,
you just want to hang out.
Just enjoy. You just want to hang out and watch a show, and
all you have is your bed.
An hotel does, yeah, exactly. If there's only the bed, then I don't stay there. So that's the one thing that I check every time, is that there must be a couch, an armchair, somewhere where I can sit. Otherwise, I actually checked out on a couple of occasions just because they didn't have the chair.
That's a really good one. I never even really thought about it. You just assume there's some sort of sitting device, but you're right. Sometimes you get in, it's like a full blown big black office chair with 10 movements on it, but it's an office chair. It's not a.
But it's an office chair. Yeah, that one you get. That one you get pretty much everywhere. But it's not a place where you may want to spend a few hours after dinner and before going to bed.
Yeah. So
that's really something that I pay a lot of attention to, especially now that two things happen at the same time. I'm getting older, and Netflix and streaming was invented. So.
It's true. And another common trick that hotels will do is to put that awkward bench at the end of the bed.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of fabric covered bench, which maybe your suitcase is supposed to go on there, but if you have a larger one, it doesn't fit. Maybe you're supposed to sit on there to tie your shoelace, or maybe you're supposed to sit on there to watch your Netflix. We don't know.
No, I wouldn't want to watch my Netflix on. I always thought that is to tie my shoes, so that's the way I've interpreted it so far when I find it.
Exactly. You and 3 other friends, right? So, yeah. It's funny, going back to that, the awkward meal service. For those of us in North America that do the transatlantic run, it actually came up. There was not Netflix, but before, some documentary about, how air travel messes with your sleep patterns. And they kind of tracked it of how, you leave here typically on an evening departure. You have a natural dinner, fine. And at 2 a.m. equivalent for whatever body you're in, just like you said, bang, the lights come on, the shades are open, and like there's a breakfast being thrown in your face, and your body's like not even at the point of being able to consume it, but they have to provide you food.
Yeah, flying eastward. For flying eastward, it's notoriously bad for you, and they don't make it better. I mean, some airlines do this better than others. I have to say, for reasons that are, again, beyond my capability of understanding. Some of them do what we just described. So when it's 2 a.m. And you finished your dinner 2 to 3 hours before, they pretend to wake everybody up and serve breakfast. While, for instance, because the time of those, especially if you fly to Europe, if you fly to Dubai, okay, we can debate, and
you can get a bit more hours in there.
It's a longer flight, but if you fly to the UK, that's 6 hours from the East Coast.
Yeah,
it's 7 hours if you fly to continental Europe or Milan. And in this, a few airlines have mastered the art of letting people sleep, and British Airways deserves some credit. And American Airlines as well, I have to say, to an extent, because they would only serve a very light breakfast, only to those who want it. They would do it in silence. They won't disturb the rest of the cabin, so that they're actually quite good at that. But if you ask me, for instance, what I think is the worst possible flight on the planet, at least in my personal experience, is the Dubai to Singapore service operated by Singapore Airlines, that is otherwise a very decent airline, as we know. But the way they do this, again, maybe to portray themselves as a full service airline and an airline that cares, on a flight of 6.5 hours, it takes them about 2.5 hours to serve dinner, even in economy, because they want to give you a welcome drink and then the full dinner, and then the lights go off for maybe 2.5 hours, and then bam, as you described, lights go up. Everybody wakes up and people talking. And then they pretend that you eat when in reality it's 2:30 a.m. for you, and then you land in Singapore and it's 7 a.m. and you have the rest of the day in front of you, which doesn't make any sense. I mean, if I, beyond the life achievement of maybe get lifetime gold membership with BA, the other thing that I would really love to try is to be in the room when some humans decide these service patterns, and I want to know who they are, and
have a
and
chat.
how many flights did they actually take. Yeah,
exactly.
And how many flights did they actually take themselves? Because my feeling is that probably not many.
Yep, 100% agree with you. That's a good achievement goal right there.
Yeah.
Now, have you noticed with the the new style of, whether it be a business or a first, having a suite with a sliding door, or any sort of a lot more privacy equipment showing up, has that changed in terms of how the crew wants to either interrupt or not interrupt, or the lights, or the ability to indicate? Because some of them you can hit a marker and it'll show a red light versus a green light. Some don't. Has that had any sort of impact on kind of what we're talking about?
Yeah, that certainly help a lot if you're having so if you fly in business class, things are easier by definition, and that easiness includes this element of being disturbed a lot less. But it really depends on the airline. It really depends on the crew. So even within the same airline, different crews have different sensitivities. Like they operate in a way that is not fully consistent all the time, which again, as a corporate trainer, makes me question some of the training programs. But in general, yes, of course, when there's a door, when there's a bit of when technology can help you, that you have your light. There used to be stickers back in the days, please wake me up for meals, or let me sleep now. Those have been largely substituted. We have different types of light. Yes, there's all those help a lot. But I find that sometimes it's really not consistent. For some reason, some crew members feel the need of waking you up, even if it's very, very apparent that you're sleeping well at that point, and you might not be interested in that slice of pizza.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that that extends, for speaking of lighting, but of a different type, the fact that there's now the different coloring that exists on different airlines much more than in the past. That some airlines probably still turn it up to full bright, and others are kind of halfway, or different softer colors or something to try to go through.
Exactly, and then that was my point. I mean, since they also have the possibility of doing mood lighting and whatnot. So why turning on all the lights like they need to play a football game in the middle of the plane?
Yeah,
so that actually adds to the mystery of why would they do that.
Yeah. And I can see where this is going in an interesting direction. I think Emirates is the only one I can think of where they have the suite with the projected window view. on the screen next to you. So in theory, you could project anything you want, you know. So there may come a day where, this could be fun, where you as a passenger can select, I want this to be a night flight, the entire flight. It could be in the middle of the day, but you have a projection of darkness or of night flying sky in your suite. Now that could change.
Yeah, well,
those things
are. Yeah, well, those things are. Yeah, I mean, the technology is there to an extent. Obviously, this is something. Yeah, mainly for the people in seat 1A, just to connect with the title of the podcast. And I'm afraid that people further back won't enjoy the same level of the same level of flexibility or the same level of autonomy in determining their flying experience. But that's to be accepted, of course. It's part of life.
Do you have any personal travel tips or habits or hacks that you can share that others could sort of think about joining in on? What do you do on your own? And again, this is in-flight, hotel, ground, airport experience. How do you kind of move yourself along quickly? Little tricks.
Booking.
Yeah, bookings obviously depends on the situation, and on some circumstances somebody else would take care of my travel arrangement. I don't like, if a client needs to do it, then obviously they do it. But when I'm in charge, I don't trust anyone to do my own to do my travel arrangements for me. Like, I don't have an assistant that would do that, because they would never have the same kind of eye for the type of seat that I want on that particular plane at that particular time on that particular route. So I would never. It wouldn't make any sense to rely on someone else for. So I do that myself, and I also have a fair number of apps where I constantly monitor the situation on my flights in terms of available seats. Especially again in those cases where I'm in economy or economy plus, or where a seat can make an even bigger difference than it does in business or first. So
are there ones that you like or prefer, or?
Yeah, like for instance, if you're flying with, let's say, United Premium Economy, the first row window seat has a much better, would give you a much better flight than any other seat on that plane. So, and that's a plane that I take quite often, because Dubai to Newark nonstop is operated also by United. In addition to Emirates, timing is good. They have premium economy, so I do fly with them quite a lot. But there are two seats.
Oh, right, the two-seater on that one. Okay.
Being the first row on the window means you have privacy, but you can leave without you can stand over your companion without disturbing them. So it's a quiet flight. You can move around. You can put your stuff on the floor or beside the seat during the flight. So there are certain times where I know I have to take that flight and those seats are not available, that I monitor the app, kind of like my morning ritual. I have coffee and I monitor if one of those seats became available.
And are you using like the airlines apps, or is there any particular
in this case, yes.
Okay.
There are certain, like Expert Flyer would give you an alert if a particular seat becomes available, but I found that to be a bit unreliable. So sometimes the alert comes much later that you might want it to come to you. So I don't trust them fully. I use the service. So I use expertflyer.com, for instance, to check if a flight is particularly full, what aircraft or subtype or configuration of aircraft is operating a particular route. So all of that I use, but the seat alerts, I don't find them to be particularly reliable. At least in my experience, they haven't been so far. But that's certainly a travel hack. So it makes sense if you fly a lot, I can totally understand why a less frequent flyer might want to not to invest, $10 a month in a service like that gives you the availability in all the subclasses. But I find them incredibly useful to plan where to go, when to sit, which flight to choose, where I can choose. So I find it quite useful, as I find useful having of course, having status with most of the alliances. You end up having access to business class check-in and lounges on most flights. Otherwise, having a credit card or something that gives you a priority pass or something similar is worth it if you fly at least a little bit. It's less valuable, I guess, in North America than it is in Europe or Asia, because the availability of lounges that accept priority pass and others in North America is not really the same as it is in Europe or in Asia. But being based in Asia at the moment, I find it useful for those times you fly with a low cost for any reason. You still have a place to relax and go. And other than that, I would say that I never get on a plane without a good quality sleeping mask and without earplugs. So those two, I mean, just to you create your own mood lighting in a way.
Exactly.
So those are absolutely mandatory elements of any trip that I take, because taking a lot of overnight flights, even when you fly to business or first or anything like that, that you still have noises, you still have different people, turning on lights and so on and so forth. And I sleep okay on planes, but I can still wake up if somebody turns on a light. So having a good quality, investing in a good quality sleeping mask, in good quality earphones that have sound, noise cancellation, all of those things are crucial to at least increase your chances to have a peaceful flight.
Yes, exactly. And that's the key word, is peaceful. Yeah, the least interruption. This is a good one. And we're going to do top and then bottom, but top airlines, top airports, aircraft, hotel chains. What's your top choices?
Always, of course, always a tricky question, because consistency is a challenge in the industry. And so, for instance, if you ask me, I've been debating with myself for a long time. I said, if somebody ever invites me to a podcast, should I say that Singapore Airlines is the best airline, or should I say that Emirates is the best airline? And I was thinking about this, and I thought about this for a long time, and then the final determination is that probably Emirates is. If you take everything into consideration, Emirates still is the most solid airline when it comes to a combination of entertainment, food, leg room, and generally speaking, reliability. I think they perform better than Singapore Airlines. Probably worse than Japan Airlines and ANA, but I have a lot less experience recently with those, so they're not part of my daily or weekly or monthly routine. They're more like the exotic addition from time to time, but certainly Emirates wins, even if, and that's a big if, for instance, Emirates operates two types of aircraft, as most of your listeners would know, the A380 and the 777, and the experience is completely different with the A380 than it is from the 777. It's a completely different airline.
Yeah.
The 380 in any class except business, premium economy when it's available, on the few 380s when it's available, it's a great product. But the economy class and business class on the 777, they are subpar compared to the best airlines in the world. Legroom still okay, but that's about it. The A380 instead gives a great flying experience. The Emirates A380 in this case. Yes. So if you're lucky enough to fly on that plane, it's one experience. The other plane is a very different experience. course, sometimes we have no choice. So we take whatever is flying the route that you need on the day that you need it. But for instance, Singapore Airlines is a bit more consistent in that regard. But I think it's considering the one thing that is most valuable on a plane. I don't know whether you agree with this, but yes, I like the service, and consistency in customer service is key. But at the end of the day, it's real estate that is valuable. So if you give me more legroom, especially when flying economy or premium economy, if you give me more legroom, that's what I value. And in that regard, Emirates still is a clear winner. While on the other side, I'm sad to say, because it was my first love, then among the big airlines, the ones that I fly more often, Lufthansa in economy is definitely not. It's something that I actively avoid it.
Yeah.
Because the quality of the food and the legroom is really not what it should be. It's a bit of a torture, so I don't do it. I simply avoid it. For instance, that's in terms of airlines. Just to mention a couple of examples, then of course North American airlines that don't have a great reputation, and unfortunately that's for good reason. Mainly because when you run such a big operation, not that Emirates or Singapore are small, but it's a ginormous operations like you do with North American Airlines. It's complicated, and maintaining a decent bottom line is not easy. At the same time, I wish the customer service comes back to the major airlines at some point in the future.
That's fair, and that's true. And it's very interesting what you're saying about the A380, because I think what's happened a lot now with the big players, such as going to be BA, Lufthansa, and even Singapore, they were kind of heading in that direction to keep those aircraft top notch and the cabin experience. And with the pause during the pandemic where they parked them, Emirates is kind of the only one that sort of brought them back to, a top level position, whereas the others are sort of running older, dated product. So it'd be interesting to see if they sort of refurbish that product to keep those planes going for.
Yeah, I think British Airways announced that they are refurbishing them.
Mm-hmm.
I think they did. I mean, at this point, I'm not sure if I remember what the plan with Singapore Airlines. But yes, in fact, that's one of the strange or unusual things about living. Being based in Dubai is that with Emirates being the home airlines and being the largest world operator of A380, that's the plane that I use probably more often recently. While for most of the people that live in other places, that's kind of an exotic.
Yeah, that's their exotic,
especially
flight.
after COVID. It's still an exotic plane because you don't get to fly. We get to fly pretty much everywhere, multiple times per month. So that's a bit funny when you live in Dubai, and then in that sense, it puts in a different position in a kind of a peculiar situation where you fly this aircraft pretty much. Yeah, I mean sometimes multiple times a month.
Yeah. Now, is Dubai your top airport in going with that trend, or not necessarily?
No, top airport. I still think that among the big airports, Singapore Changi is still unbeatable. Dubai tries to keep up with them, but the style, the cleanliness, the innovations that the Singaporeans included in their airport is still places them again firmly on the top of any list. To be honest, I can't think of any other airport getting even close to the quality of services, the variety of services that are available at Changi. Although recently, just to maybe focus on something that's a bit smaller but still interesting, a bit smaller airport. I flew to Oman a couple of months ago. That was the first time actually I got there. And Muscat Airport, for instance, is probably, while relatively small compared to some of the mega airports that we mentioned earlier, is probably on par with Changi when it comes to the way it's perfectly immaculate. It smells like a 5-star hotel. There are gardens and wood and perfumes. It's really nice.
Really?
It's really a beautiful airport. So I was not awfully surprised knowing the country and the region, but I was a bit surprised because it's really beautiful. It's quaint. I think is a word that we could use. It's really a pleasant place.
Fantastic. We're going to add that one to the list.
It was a nice discovery. It was a nice discovery.
Yeah, that's great.
And then Oman Airlines, did you fly with Oman or did you fly with a different airline to get to Muscat?
I didn't know. I actually flew with our Air Arabia on that only time. So I never actually tried Oman Air, although they certainly have a nice reputation. Although now they are downscaling their operations dramatically, so it's going to be even more difficult to fly with them. Although they are joining One World Alliance at the same time. So from one side, I think they cut their international network by 1/3 almost by retiring all the A330s. On the other side, they are joining the alliance soon. So of course, that makes them more palatable as an option, maybe to fly from, let's say, from Dubai onto some Asian or a few African destinations. That might be an option, especially if the price is attractive.
Interesting. Yeah, that's one to spotlight to keep on. Now going to the other end of the scale then.
Well, just and to check it, because you mentioned, like chairs at hotels. Do you have any chains or hotel favorites?
Yes. I mean, yes and no. If you ask me where do I stay more often, I certainly stay more often with the Marriott Group because their footprint is gigantic. So you can pretty much find multiple options within Marriott in most places, and therefore, being a platinum member and so on and so forth, you tend to value all of the perks that come with status. Although those perks are a lot less relevant when traveling to the US or even Canada to an extent, so to North America in general. The status is a lot less recognized. Maybe there are too many people with status in this part of the world because a lot more people travel constantly. So, but at the end of the day, that pays for those points pay for a few nice holidays. So I have to say I'm more faithful to larger chains. I said mainly the Marriott Group. Then I would say number 2 Hilton. The Intercontinental Holiday Inn, I'm not really like them a lot. Although Intercontinentals are good hotels, but they're very few and far between.
Yeah.
So I don't use them as much as I did in the past. Hyatt, lots of people love staying Hyatt. In my case, that's the one that I never gotten around to develop a relationship with because at the end of the day, you cannot have status with everyone. So I am pretty faithful to Marriott and Hilton at the end of the day. I don't do a lot of boutique hotels and independent hotels. I have to say, in most cases, just because I'm used to my routine. So, and also because a bit too often boutique hotel is just another word for we don't really have all the stuff that you need, but we need to find a nice way of saying it, and therefore we call ourselves a boutique hotel. So unless I know them well, I have to say I find myself being a bit boring when it comes to hotel choices and staying with the biggest chains more than independent hotels. Of course, there's nothing wrong with them, but they do require a bit more work and research. Not always have the time to do that.
Now, swinging to the other direction, bottom of the list. This is the fun one.
Yeah. For airlines, that's a very difficult question. Like, the bottom of the pyramid is very populated. So unfortunately, the trend has been going in the direction of, especially even before COVID, there was a lot of cost cutting going on. that affected the travel experience with a few major airlines. But of course, if I have to think about the airlines that I try to avoid, low-cost airlines. Don't get me wrong. I think that Ryanair in Europe and Southwest and others in the US and Air Asia, they deserve the Nobel Peace Prize for having made the world a smaller place and
Yeah, they
connected
have a place in
people
the world for
across
sure.
continents.
Yeah.
I completely love what they've done and I admire them for that. The one thing that I appreciate the most on the day to day is that they lowered the price of the other airlines, which are the ones that I take, because again, mainly because of the status, it just easier and faster to fly with them. But while the few times where maybe I have to fly with a low cost because it's the only airline flying the particularly non-stop service that I need, or they fly at the time that I want, or because I'm going on holidays. Of course, when you fly, when you take 120, 130 flights a year, that one flight you need to queue for a long time, and then you need to wait on the finger standing for 20 minutes and before they actually let you on the plane, and so on and so forth. That is not particularly enjoyable. So to be honest, I try to avoid it if I can. But as I said before, deep respect and extremely thankful for what the low cost have done for the industry and what they've done for the world and connections across cultures, and it's incredibly valuable and precious. In terms of airports, well, again, the bottom it's a pretty populated place, but just to mention some that most of your listeners would know. I'm not a fan of New York, for instance. New York, because that's one of the airports where I fly more often. And if I fly out, the queues again, the mess, especially as a non-American, non-Canadian, and therefore not having access to TSA pre-check, not having access to global entry, and to all of those systems that are unfortunately not available for European citizens, except a couple of countries that have. Italy is not part of them. So every time we need to go through it means much longer waiting times, messy places. So not pleasant, I have to say.
And
so that would probably
just back to the airlines then. If you could pick one or two from that very big populated list at the bottom, in the major airline players, we'll leave the low cost out of it.
In the major airline players, I would say for different reasons, I'm on the major airline players, and unfortunately, American Airlines doesn't really. It doesn't really. It didn't go in a good direction, I guess, in the past decade or so. They from removing the personal screens. I remember, like back in the 25 years ago, or something like that. I mean, in the beginning of the end of last century, American Airlines was famous because they actually had the biggest legroom in the industry by far, and all of their communication were based on that. I guess it was 34 inches, like the regular. That
like
apparently was then unsustainable, and they started going in the opposite direction. And now the quality of the onboard service, the way they refurbish the planes with more seats than the other majors. So not just more seats in general, like relative to the other big players in the North American markets, they are certainly like number. If I have to say, it's probably going to be quality of service is Delta, United, American. That's what most of the rankings would probably show, and I think they're right. On the other side of the pond, in this case, and again, still the Nobel Peace Prize goes to them, but flying with them is not pleasant. It's Ryanair. The the whole process from beginning to the end induces stress, and therefore it's something that, from the queue at the check-in, from the queue for boarding, with the 28 inches leg room, to the constant announcements about everything and anything for all of those 2 hours, even if it's 6 a.m. in the morning. You get to your destination that you're like 1.5 hour on Ryanair. It's like 19 hours on Singapore Airlines.
That's a wonderful way to say it. It's like taking the shopping mall with you in the air when you're on
exactly.
flights. Yeah, with the advertising and the nonstop, because those flight attendants are trying to get commission on whatever they sell. It's fantastic.
I think so. Yeah, I think that's one of the elements of the. I think that's one of the elements. I mean, it's not like that. There are some just to go, keep on going a bit up and down in the ranking. There are certain low cost carriers that, for instance, found, I guess, a way in the middle that is pleasant, like Air Arabia. If you live in the Middle East, it's like very clean, very straightforward. Check-in is a bit messy in most cases, but the rest of the experience is quite nice. So it doesn't have to be necessarily unpleasant, but unfortunately, on a few, for the majority of the cases, it ends up being a bit unpleasant.
This reminds me, I mean, EasyJet has kind of set themselves apart in the same way. I mean, EasyJet and Ryanair basically showed up around the same time and went head to head. And somehow EasyJet went the civilized,
a little
simple,
more.
It's cheap. And yeah, you're right. Check-in can always be messy, but I mean, that's an airport issue sometimes. But the flight on an EasyJet flight it's fine. But you're right. And then compared to the shopping mall of the Ryanair.
I agree. Yeah. And I was having this conversation literally a couple of hours ago, and I was talking to a friend about booking flights to a conference in Prague, and low-cost carriers are the only available option for non-stop now between Milan and Prague, because we're going to be in Milan at the time. And there is Ryanair, EasyJet, and Wizz Air. And
I'd say EasyJet.
We all agreed. Yeah, like we all are like EasyJet, Ryanair, and Wizz is like you don't even pronounce the name. Although they, again, provide a lifeline for a lot of airports and communities.
Yep.
But I've done it once or twice, and I'm not looking forward to repeating the experience.
Yeah. Oh, man. And just so, kind of getting close to wrapping up. So looking into the future, and, I think you have a lot more travel in your years ahead and some lifetime achievements to try and make. But what do you wish to see in travel before the day comes when you're over it? What do you wish you can aim for in technology, or what airlines will do, or an airport experience would do?
I think that we will certainly experience, we are now experiencing a larger, widening gap between, the front of the plane, between seat 1A and the back of the plane. I mean, if you look at, what happened in the past decades, premium classes, first and business. Well, first now it's marginal. Let's focus on business class. Business class became so much better than it was even just 15 or 20 years ago. Economy class got worse, so that the gap widened. What I would like to see is, for instance, I fly a combination of classes. It really depends on the situation, on the client, it can be anything. I fly premium economies quite a lot. So, for instance, one thing that I would like to see is someone that innovates a little bit on the premium economy product, because now pretty much they're all the same. There must be like a marginal difference in the quality of service. Emirates probably the best one on the market right now in terms of service positioning on the plane. But at the end of the day, we're always looking at a 38-inch legroom, pretty much 100%, I guess. Maybe Japan Airlines goes to 40, ANA maybe 39 or 40, but it's pretty much the same product with minimal variation across the board. So I wish somebody would start innovating a little bit, maybe with different type of seating, being a bit more innovative on that class, because it's quite often where I end up. I end up there quite often, and I'd like to see some innovation there. Technology will certainly keep on helping and streamlining the process. Although I'm old enough to be very attached to the paper boarding passes, for instance.
Yes.
Because I've been collecting them for 20, 35 years, 40 years. I don't know, like since pretty much forever. And I really care about having the paper boarding pass. And then at the beginning of every year, I take all of the boarding passes from the previous year and I put them in an envelope on top of all the other envelopes. So that is where I don't particularly enjoy the technological advancements that will eventually make them not only redundant but not available anymore. So that's the negative of technology. But other than that, now the fact that you can choose everything about your flight, even last minute change of seating through the apps, certainly made life much easier, and will keep on going in that direction. The one thing that I really hope I can see, beside the premium economy and maybe a bit more decency on the economy class side, although I'm afraid that's not going to happen, is at least a comeback of the culture of customer service, especially with European and North American airlines, because especially with COVID made things a lot worse, but the trend started well before COVID. Customer service seems to have lost all of the importance. There's no consistency. You see very often people that don't care, probably lack of training. I don't know. There are many reasons, but I hope airlines will start refocusing on it. Also because, yes, I mean, maybe that you need to do some training, but ultimately, if there's one thing that comes at zero cost, is courtesy and care. That costs $0. So there's really, no reason why they shouldn't be paying more attention. So I hope that's going to come back.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that one. I think that has a lot to do with the demographic of cabin crew. And if you think about pre-pandemic, a lot of these big flag carriers have like sort of an older demographic of cabin crew flying. But with that comes either two things. Either they're bitter and crusty and just hate what they're doing and don't have any customer service, or they know how to deliver it. They're incredible. They're experts and they're professionals. And sadly, because of the pandemic, a lot of that group self-retired because, it was a natural end of line. And so now you have, and you mentioned it with the training, brand new, younger flight attendants being brought on. And some of them just, it takes years to develop that refined level of customer service that you're mentioning.
And institutional knowledge, yeah.
Yeah, and how to help and react and be able to provide the right experience for, frequent flyers.
Absolutely. So yeah, that one, I hope it comes back, because as I said, it really depends on the demographic. There are different elements attached to it, but as a passenger, on some occasions, you look around and say, well, if these people hate each other and their job, maybe they should consider
something else.
Exactly. But it's not that. On the other side, it's a very stressful job. But probably, I guess, really training was cut through in time. I mean, in the past, there must be a reason why. But the culture at the moment, and again, I'm speaking specifically and more about North American and Europeans, and even North American even more. This culture developed somehow that caring is bad, and then the job is just to process people as fast as possible, doing as little as possible, and that's what defines a successful life for cabin crew. But I don't believe that's the case. I guess it's different in reality. With a little word a little gesture can have a great impact on the day of a person, on the travel, and it comes for free. So I don't really see why this doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, 100% agree.
So I hope it comes back.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you mentioned the paper boarding pass. I've actually
man,
started to re-keep, I have a toddler son and he's getting into flying. So I'm keeping every single boarding pass. So I actually have a stack here from our last trip. But the only flaw these days, and you might want to check some of your envelopes, the silly ink fades. It's like an old fax machine with the thermal paper. The fade out. So I don't know. I'm going to keep them and hopefully maybe one day
they do fade. Yeah, that's something that we cannot. Yeah, that's something we cannot control, but it's still there.
Yeah. Or maybe there's like a stamp from a passport from an exotic place on there. So awesome. Marco, it's been amazing listening to you and hearing your thoughts and perspectives. I hope our listeners have enjoyed this unique perspective for someone that's flown around the world a number of times. Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much for being on the experience with us.
Yeah, thank you, Marco.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I loved it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
If you're liking this episode experience, you may also enjoy Experience 61, a very special interview, selling Airbus in China. It's available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Excellent. So, well, thank you, everyone. And while that wraps up Experience 80 of the Seat 1A podcast, if you liked this podcast experience, be sure to rate us and subscribe. Tell your friends and fellow travelers about us. Make sure you visit us at podcast.seat1a.org for complete show notes. That's Sierra Echo Alpha Tango, the number 1, alpha.org. Feedback, addenda, letting us know where we've messed up. You can send all of that to stories, STORIES, at seat1a.org. If you'd like to support the show financially, we have a page at Patreon, patreon.com/seat1a. Links are included in the show notes.
And as always, we look forward to your stories. If you have anything you'd like to hear on this podcast or interesting questions or travel experiences you want to share with us, please do get in touch and we'd be happy to get moving with an experience.
Excellent. So until the next time, I'm Geoff. Thanks for listening.
And I'm Vinod. You're cleared for takeoff. Have a great flight.